A verdict has been reached in the Heaggan Brown trial in Milwaukee. The former police officer charged with the unlawful shooting of a suspect who was fleeing a traffic stop in Sherman Park last August.
Yeah, that verdict was reached, Michelle, about 20 minutes ago, and we were told from the onset that once the jury did reach its verdict behind closed doors, that all parties involved would have about a half hour to reconvene into the courtroom. Now, we expect that verdict to be read in court between 5 and 10 minutes from now. You're looking live at the courtroom in the Milwaukee County Courthouse, where the jury will assemble, and both parties for the two sides will assemble as well. The deliberations lasted a little bit more than 9 hours. They started yesterday afternoon after closing arguments, and they went for about 5 hours or so before retiring for the day about 4:45. They returned back to the courtroom this morning at 9 o'clock, and it wasn't long after that that they came back into the courtroom and asked the judge a few questions, Michelle.
Yeah, we are waiting for the jury to return to the courtroom. As you can see, the staff has already assembled here. No sign of the defendant in this case, or his lawyers, or the prosecution. And of course, the judge has not yet taken the bench. So we are standing by here and will be broadcasting this live here on CBS 58 and of course on our social media and website. Heaggan Brown had worked for the Milwaukee Police Department for some 6 years. He first worked as a police aide before graduating from the police academy. Interestingly enough, it was back in 2014 he was praised for helping a homeless woman, arranging for shelter, getting her a meal. It was something that got a lot of press back then. And then this dramatic fall from grace. Shortly after the shooting of 23-year-old Sylville Smith, we learned that he was also under investigation for soliciting two men for sex.
Yeah, and then the shooting, August 13th, the shooting occurred. It was making a traffic stop, and Sylville Smith was in a car, bailed from the car, and a chase ensued. And of course, key element, perhaps the most important evidence in this case, that body cam video, not only from Officer Heaggan Brown, but from his partner as well, that was looked at over and over again in slow motion, real time, frame by frame.
The point needs to be made, though, that his termination from the department, as we look at this timeline here, was actually on the separate sex assault case, but it was in August 13th that we had that incident in Sherman Park. A short time later, within hours of police protecting the scene, businesses were lit on fire, unrest by several crowds in intersections blocking traffic. A police officer actually hurt while she was responding to a call, a cement block thrown at her squad car. It went through the windshield. She survived and later received a commendation from the department for her bravery. That unrest continued into the next day, August 14th. Not as much damage, and quickly the community tried to come to terms with what had happened and how to repair.
Exactly. Then in mid-December, the charges involving this shooting were filed by Milwaukee County District Attorney.
That followed the October filing of the sex assault charges, and Chief Flynn making the decision to fire Heaggan Brown.
Exactly. Chief Flynn firing Heaggan Brown after that sex assault charge, and then the December 15th charge involving reckless homicide. The charge in this case, first-degree reckless homicide. But in this case, the jury has some options here. They will have to decide whether or not Heaggan Brown is guilty or innocent. And if they believe he is guilty, were his actions reckless or were his actions negligent? Now, the DA again charged him with first-degree reckless homicide, which according to state statutes is when an individual does not intend to, but recklessly causes the death of another human being under circumstances that illustrate, and this is important here, utter disregard for human life. Now, if the jury could not reach a verdict on that charge, they could consider a second option, second-degree reckless homicide, which is the same as first, but does not include utter disregard for human life. The third option they had was homicide by negligent handling of a dangerous weapon. That's when a person causes the death of another human being by the negligent operation or handling of a dangerous weapon, explosives, or fire. Now, that's a Class G felony, punishable by a maximum prison sentence of 10 years in prison. The other two, Michelle, are much higher.
Yeah, it is the subject of debate how much time we're actually talking about. It's usually in the charging papers. The most severe charged 60, the second 25, the other 10. However, some legal experts say that in interpretation and legal proceedings it could change. He's looking at multiple decades behind bars, though, 40 at least if convicted on this most severe of charges.
And if he happens to be acquitted, he will not be set free. He is being held on $100,000 bond in connection with that unrelated sexual assault case. The trial for that case is scheduled to begin August 21st. So there's a number of things that still are taking place as far as legally involving Dominique Heaggan Brown.
This trial lasting just about a week. The jury sequestered the entire time. The charges in the sex assault case, though, are disturbing indeed. Allegations that the victim was intoxicated and then unconscious. The prostitution charge comes from the fact that he actually offered money. One of the victims, however, one of the young men, in chilling detail told detectives that Heaggan Brown was actually watching the images of burning businesses on TV in Sherman Park and acted almost cavalier about it. This, of course, not entered as evidence in this case that is currently being decided and which has been decided as we wait live to hear the verdict in this excessive force trial.
And you talk about those fires, Michele, occurring the nights of the 13th, especially the 13th, and then extending into August 14th, which was a Sunday, causing nearly $6 million in damage. Of course, the BP gas station set on fire, the O'Reilly Auto Parts, BMO Harris Bank, Jet Beauty Supply, PJ's Supermarket, MJM Liquor Store, Big Jim's Liquor, and another wholesale liquor store. After this happened, a number of community leaders came out and said, what is going on here? Why are you taking this out on the community we are trying to rebuild, the community we're trying to bring jobs to? A number of community gatherings have happened since this, where there has been a sense of collaboration. What have we learned from this, and how can we move forward in a positive way? And
it has gotten local stakeholders such as representatives in Madison involved, saying that there has to be an investment in job training and placement, and also transportation to jobs for the individuals who live in Sherman Park and want it to thrive. BMO Harris Bank making the commitment that it will reopen, and not giving up on that neighborhood even after the events of that night.
And you talk about job training. There's been some police training that has happened. It happened before this. It happened after some other high-profile police-involved shootings. The Don Trey Hamilton case, the case wasn't a shooting, but where Derek Williams died in the back seat of a squad car. So there have been some other cases in Milwaukee where charges were not brought, but there has been, following that, a number of things that have happened with Milwaukee police where they have gone over their police procedures and have changed them. And of course, since that time, the body cameras came into use. Milwaukee, one of the first big cities to incorporate the use of body cameras, and that happened in October of 2015, where the first 200 were handed out to the police officers, followed last year by more than 1,200 police officers having these body cameras.
As we look at some of the photos of the faces that have really brought to the forefront the issue of excessive force and police-community relations, some legal observers saying police training is on trial in a way, and many experts are speaking out, trying to get the word out about the training procedures at issue. As we look, that 77 officers have been charged since 2005, 26 convicted, 28 cleared, still 23 cases pending.
And you talk about the amount of time here that it took for this jury to reach a verdict. In comparison, just for the sake of comparison.
As we see Jonathan Smith.
Yes.
And Steve Cohn enter the courtroom. These are the defense attorneys for former police officer Dominique Heaggan Brown. They are going back, probably no doubt, into the holding cell or perhaps in judges' chambers. The Honorable Jeffrey Conan is presiding over this case. No doubt everybody wants to be very careful on how the proceedings go on from here. We know how much is at stake here in the community.
And prosecuting this case for Milwaukee County was Milwaukee County District Attorney John Chisholm, who was the one who came out and said, yes, charges are going to be filed. He agrees that the first shot fired by Dominique Heaggan Brown was justified. All parties agree that the first shot was justified, but he believes that the second shot that occurred 1.69 seconds after the first was a case of excessive force.
And he said there was no way you could argue that that second shot was self-defense. The defense, of course, countered and said we're talking less than 2 seconds to make that decision. In fact, they put one expert witness, the man who wrote the book on police training, so to speak, to say that you always have to assume, and officers are trained to assume, that there will be a second weapon. We've heard from many that the training also involves instructions that as long as the hands are moving, you will perceive the person is moving those hands as a threat if you had a prior encounter with them. And it was clear that Dominique Heaggan Brown was pursuing Sylville Smith, and Sylville Smith did have a gun in his hand at the start of that, at issue. And this is what was looked at over and over again during these proceedings, was the moment that Sylville Smith was seen tossing that gun or attempting to toss that gun over a fence or somehow get rid of it. And that's when the second shot came in as he was down on the ground.
And that use of force expert you're talking about, Robert Willis, who literally wrote the book on police procedures here in the state of Wisconsin. It's called the Defense and Arrest Tactics Manual for Wisconsin Police Officers. He said during the trial that, since 2010, 3 officers in this country have been killed by suspects who were carrying more than one weapon. So officers involved in these kinds of situations assume that the assailant probably has more than one weapon, and they have to mentally prepare for that. And when we say mentally, it's all about reactions. The jury spent more than 9 hours trying to figure out what happened in a span of 12 seconds. 12 seconds, that
from
foot
the
chase.
Time he got out of the car.
From the time he got out of that car, and that's what the body cam video showed. And we're going to be showing that to you right now. It happened on August 13th, and Dominique Heaggan Brown chased Sylville Smith between 2 homes until Smith came upon a fence. One shot was fired. He was shot in the right bicep, fell to the ground, and then was shot again 1.69 seconds later in the chest from a distance about 3 feet away.
And we continue to review what the jurors looked at during these proceedings as we once again check in live where the verdict is about to be read at any moment. When we see the judge come in, obviously that's the sign that we are very close. Of course, we are not going to show you when the jury enters the room. We, of course, are respecting their privacy at the instructions of the court. We will be bringing this verdict in this very controversial case to you live here on CBS 58.
Of course, we haven't heard much from Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn since this all began. A day after Heaggan Brown was charged in mid-December, he did say that he's not going to comment on whether he thought it was right or wrong to bring the charges, but he did say that what happened was this officer was put into what he called a combat situation. And he went on to say, quote, "In the context of the 7.5-second video in which 2 shots were fired, I did not see something that looked like it was obviously a violation in policy and law." District
Attorney John Chisholm and his co-counsel are now at the prosecution table. All the major players are gathering. We're waiting for the defendant, Dominique Heaggan Brown, to enter the courtroom, as well as the judge and the jury to hear the verdict.
And the camera right now, as you can see, behind some glass in this courtroom in the Milwaukee County Courthouse, and the reflection there are members of family, of the Sylville Smith family, who are gathered there as well. And after the charges were filed, the Smith family did issue a statement saying that they appreciate the DA has shown independence and sound judgment in prosecuting the officer who shot and killed Sylville. We also appreciate that this is but the first step in holding that officer accountable, but a necessary step in bringing some measure of justice. Again, that statement coming from the family of Sylville Smith the day after the charge was filed.
Well, the information that came out, and not only these charges but the sex assault charges, quite shocking to many, because according to the Milwaukee Fire and Police Commission, Sylville Smith had not filed any kind of complaint against Heaggan or any officer, even though Smith's family has said that it had a lawsuit pending against the department. So that has always been the subject of concern, and the family not going into details while the investigation into what happened in Sherman Park last summer was underway. No doubt this will be the subject of investigation in the further, possibly civil litigation. But again, first things first, and it is time to hear the jury render a criminal verdict in this case, and we are standing by live for that.